Hey guys, welcome back to the show. This is One-on-One with Oni Black Mage. You may be familiar with his channel. He did the Recapitation Series and has quite the following online. So, how have you been?
I have been busy, which is the easy way to cover for handling projects that have not exactly updated my channel. And what I mean by that is I have been enjoying the success of where Recapitation has grown, and I look forward to where it's going to go. But right now, I guess you could say I'm on a bit of a sabbatical. But me personally, doing great. Doing great.
And that's cool. It's good to always go out and find yourself. We're here to talk about Zelda. I was curious, why is it that you never did a Zelda game during your Recapitation Series?
The answer I can say that has a little bit of history to it. The short answer is when I first started Recapitation, almost 10 years ago, it of course was a casual hobby, but I just want to cover a few series that I felt had stories that what I perceived as were commonly misinterpreted or misremembered, or really the audience could really do with a bit of a refresher constantly because it was constantly updating itself. The big ones being Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, and Resident Evil. That's it. Those were series that I enjoyed, but series that had a lot of lore, story, and characters that needed sorting out, and that's what I did. First on behalf of a friend, and next just doing it on my own. As for The Legend of Zelda, I do get asked that question a lot because when people ask me, well, what's your favorite game series? I always say The Legend of Zelda, easy, not a question in my mind. And then they ask, well, how come you've never covered content for Legend of Zelda? And if you may or may not recall the state of YouTube, maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, it was a bit of a no man's land when it came to Nintendo content. There was rather draconian content control when it came to first-party Nintendo, where unless you were on their whitelist or ambassador program, which came with its own red tape, any content you pretty much made on Nintendo games in depth were fiercely observed and at risk of being taken down. Content like mine was could have fit in that criteria. So I guess you could say fear really was the real reason at first for it.
Right, and I've talked with other content creators from that era. Dr. Wiley specifically is a good friend of mine now, and he's told me about the history back then and how Nintendo has been rather draconian in the past and continues to be in various ways, especially with the more recent takedown of channels for showing footage before Tears of the Kingdom came out. Anyhow, continue.
But yes, absolutely. I can only 100% agree with that. It was that tumultuous time where it wasn't clear if Let's Plays of video games across anybody, not just Nintendo, were subject to copyright protections or not, or fair use. That debate for fair use was such a hot, it still is, but it was a very hot topic back then, where video games were not granted as much leeway as they are now, as long as you're doing something creative with it, where just putting an upload of a video game was considered, copyright infringement and subject to being taken down, much less clips of them. Or obviously even now, like the very particular on cutscenes. Some companies still are, like Sega. Sega's also very aggressive about cutscene posting on a lot of games. A lot of people may remember that from recent like Persona games or Shin Megami Tensei or Atlas as well. Just it can be sticky. But as for when Nintendo later relaxed their standards a bit to where it's like, okay, we're going to, cool it. We're going to step away a little bit. You can make a little bit more, and here are our standards. Here's where we stand, and you can start making content. I feel we started seeing more flourishing channels, like smaller channels like you or me, who can really start doing what we want to creatively with the content and IPs that we love. We started seeing that. It wasn't just the big names who signed deals with Nintendo to be able to do that. Anybody could have the chance now. And so the question then came back, well, how come you haven't done Nintendo yet? And my answer has shifted to, I don't believe I'm ready to. As much as I love and as much experience that I have, I want to make The Legend of Zelda because it's so special to me at a time when I feel that I can do the best job I can possibly do with it. And while I believe I'm still growing in many ways, I don't think, I guess you could say I don't want to say not worthy of doing it, because that's really not the case. I don't feel prepared to mentally. I absolutely want any excuse to play Legend of Zelda again for whatever reason. I have no problems with that. I do it on my own time all the time. But I guess recapping the story of it, it leads into that, well, now I need to start dipping into a little bit more of the lore storytelling, because the overt storytelling of Legend of Zelda has always been on the more mild side, which isn't a problem, quite frankly. Stories come in all shapes and sizes. I've done Castlevania, which has even more bare-bones story, quite frankly. But The Legend of Zelda is just special-like.
Just really quick, to comment about the Castlevania ones, I was pretty amused how you incorporated things like mandatory staircases you have to go to as part of your recapitations. Thought that was funny.
Yeah. I remember when I first started doing Castlevania, I was like, what am I going to do with this? And, it's not like you have, boxes and boxes of dialogue or cinematic cutscenes. Well, I mean, you do now, but, the majority of Castlevania you didn't. So how do you convey a story that is mostly done through gameplay? And so I simply work with the gameplay as the storytelling, almost like you would when you're reading a book. And it kind of worked out surprisingly well, I felt. That was almost a model for, thank you. And I feel that's the model for how I'd approach Zelda, which kind of leads into more problems, because some Zeldas aren't exactly so straightforward, even when you play the game. But, it's never going to be clean. It's never going to be perfect, so I think just having fun with it and making it make the most sense I can, while making it the most informative as I can, is going to be the goal.
Speaking of it not being the most straightforward, that sounds like a good segue into the latest two titles, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Hey guys, let me interrupt to just ask you to subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. Now, back to the conversation. What are your thoughts on Tears of the Kingdom? I'm curious. Go ahead.
So, Tears of the Kingdom, I feel we can't discuss without discussing Breath of the Wild.
Okay.
Tears of the Kingdom is, of course, the direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, but in many ways it feels that it's not. It feels as if it assumes Breath of the Wild without necessarily relying on it. I almost say the best way to enjoy Tears of the Kingdom is to have not played Breath of the Wild. And if you, in my opinion, want to enjoy the story, you should have never played or not care about any of the previous Legend of Zelda stories. I know that sounds crazy to believe, but I do genuinely believe that. I don't mind dipping into that more. But Breath of the Wild, of course, it was built on the skeleton of the original Legend of Zelda, and was such a wonderful capstone for the legacy of Zelda. There are so many both deep and superficial references to just about everything, because I think in the most elegant way possible, it did what needed to be done for the Legend of Zelda, I guess you could say universe, metaverse even, where no matter which timeline you believe in, including no timeline, all of them are valid. Whatever you believe in, that's true, and everything else is legend, or it can all be legend. It doesn't matter. All roads lead to Breath of the Wild, and that's it. And that to me is that's a brilliant way to cap off these 30 plus years of one of the best franchises ever made that just doesn't miss. And I thought that was fantastic. And so when they come up with a sequel, I'm like, wait, how are you going to have a sequel to the very end? How is this going to go? How are you going to have an ending to the ending? And that's where Tears of the Kingdom comes in, and I have very mixed feelings in the way that they chose to approach it. Both from a gameplay perspective and level design perspective, in terms of what they learned from Breath of the Wild and how they chose to either improve or adapt it. And also the inevitable comparison to what they chose to do uniquely for Tears of the Kingdom, they also have done in the past and somehow took steps backwards. As in, they did things here in Tears of the Kingdom that have been done before, but also done better. Well, so I struggle to say that it improves in all aspects of what we've seen before for Zelda in general.
Well, let's back up a little, because I wanted to address a couple things you said there. So their choice of placing Breath of the Wild at the end of all timelines has been a pretty hotly debated choice amongst the community. Back in the day, when I was first starting my channel, I was thinking of making T-shirts to sell that like place 3 different colors that place Breath of the Wild at the end of 3 different time zones or not time zones, timelines. And
That's a good idea.
considered like watching people fight at conventions about it. But that aside, there are many people who want Breath of the Wild, obviously the Fallout are their favorite Zelda games, or people who are more focused on a canonical lore placement following the events. And even now, especially now with the way Tears of the Kingdom has done things, there's quite the debate about if Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are its own continuity, i.e. a reboot, or if they actually fit into the timeline. I would like to say that personally, I am not a fan of the timeline convergence theory, which is a belief that somehow all 3 timelines just sort of wove together into a single one, because that doesn't really make sense if you look over how time travel works, especially considering that the adult timeline with Wind Waker and so forth involve Hyrule going to a physical other part of the planet where they found a new kingdom. Like, you can't really just overlay all 3 and pretend that somehow it comes together harmoniously.
Oh, exactly. I think from the perspective of what you just said, I also, at first, like, when you first told me that, at some point, I think in passing, that some people, I was watching one of your videos, and I think it mentioned that Tears of the Kingdom can be considered like a reboot of it, and I was like, I hadn't considered that, and I think part of me doesn't want to accept that so easily.
A lot of people are against it. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's just that mental, cognitive disjunction, I guess you could say, where it's like, okay, this is my reality, and now it's being shattered by this different filter of this, but in a way, it almost makes the most sense, because there's so much, like, if you try to shoehorn in Tears of the Kingdom plus Breath of the Wild, like you said, they both together introduce so many plot holes that it's almost safer and more logical to simply remove them and say, well, this is just a separate timeline of its own. It doesn't matter what came prior. This is simply the starting point of a separate timeline. It almost makes the most sense to just throw your hands up and say, this is just different. It's our mistake to assume that it fit in any capacity to the other one. I would actually I'm coming around to that stance, to that position, to that line of thinking.
So I'm not sure if you're aware, but starting with Skyward Sword, the game's director was Fujibayashi, who then went on to also be the director for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So in many ways, if you look at it, it feels like Skyward Sword was meant to be the prequel that wraps up the timeline, because it's sort of like, and please don't cringe when I say that, it's almost like the Star Wars Episode 3 that's meant to fill in the blanks and try to connect things lore-wise. It gives us the story of the Master Sword, basically why Ganon exists, where he comes from, all of that bit. And I think most people think that the story of Skyward Sword is good, is great, and
I would agree.
Basically, everybody hates the motion controls. That's the thing everybody hates, right?
I hated it during the final battle. I didn't have a problem with it for the rest of the game.
Oh,
the final battle, I had a problem with it, but I think that was my own personal problem.
Okay. Well, like the motion controls are already a bit janky, so the pressure of fighting Demise doesn't help. But
yes, that was yeah.
But that aside, then we would have been around 2001 or 2011, not 2001. And if you recall the environment at the time, that's when everything was starting to get reboots. Like, a lot of movies were getting rebooted. Star Trek was getting rebooted. A lot of things were starting to just try to wipe away their past history and start fresh. So, if Breath of the Wild was starting to be developed around then, and I think it was. You could see how they might have had a similar time frame. Wanting to excuse away all the past lore as the era of myth and not look back, I think that's ultimately what they were trying to do with Breath of the Wild, was to wipe the slate clean so that way they could tell a brand new story without having to be restricted by the old lore. I don't agree with this. I hate the idea that it's a reboot. But when I think about it, and I've been coping with it for over a year now, because I reached this conclusion about a year ago, that the more I think about it, the more that makes sense. I know I'm not alone as well. One of my other Zelda content creators, Zelda, a friend of mine, feels that the new games are a reimagining of The Legend of Zelda, as opposed to, an outright discarding of the old stories and so forth. What are your thoughts?
So I think I'll start with my expectations going into the Tears of the Kingdom.
Sure.
I already said what it was in terms of the end of Breath of the Wild. Okay, well, this should be, at the time I was thinking it was the end, the forced end. Just, we're cutting it clean, that's it, that's the end of all the Legend of Zeldas, they all end there. Skyward Sword began it, Breath of the Wild ends it, that's it. You can tell stories at any other point. I didn't expect them to tag on another end. I remember when they first showed off Tears of the Kingdom, and they showed us going underground, and we were thinking, oh wow, we're going underground? That's so cool, it's so different. I wonder what's underground. And then they showed the next, gameplay trailer, and they showed us in the sky, and they were thinking, oh, well, we're going to the sky now, I guess, as opposed to underground. I wonder what's in the sky. And, it turns out it's both, which was nice. But when I went in, and like you, I did notice the relation to Skyward Sword in terms of creative director, and I wanted to think that there was a lot more in relation to Skyward Sword, because they just also put out Skyward Sword HD on the Switch, and I thought, okay, they're doing this because Skyward Sword is going to be relevant in major ways to Tears of the Kingdom with the sky. It seemed natural to think that line of thinking. And, when we play Tears of the Kingdom, and we of course have that sky and that underground, I guess like you, I was surprised and let down by my own expectations that really wasn't quite the case. There's too many things that are just contradictions.
Right.
And so the more and more and more we play Tears of the Kingdom in a bubble, Tears of the Kingdom is fantastic to play. It is absolutely my vote for Game of the Year. There's so much creativity, so much stuff to find, see, explore, do. The amount of freedom that they empower the player to be creative as possible is fantastic. On gameplay, it absolutely is great. But outside of that bubble, when you have to consider, even if you don't consider all the Legend of Zelda games, just Breath of the Wild, even Skyward Sword, it doesn't fit. It just plain doesn't fit. And one of the questions I have with Tears of the Kingdom, because they double down on some of the story beats in Tears of the Kingdom in terms of mysteries and questions and unanswered questions that we had in Breath of the Wild. They double down on it in Tears of the Kingdom to where it's like, okay, is this really the same Hyrule? Is this really the same legacy, this world, this universe that we has? Is this really a final stop? Because it doesn't feel that way. Like your friend Zeldam said, it almost does feel like a reimagining or a reboot, however you really want to define it. It's different no matter what. I feel it is different. I feel there's more and more stacking evidence that this is a different world, and it does cut ties from Legend of Zelda prior without telling anybody. And I feel that sharp whiplash, that epiphany, is kind of what stings the most, because nobody saw it coming. And I'm working through that process myself, but it like you said, it makes the most sense.
It feels like Nintendo's not being straightforward. Let's say that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are meant to be a reboot, a reimagining of the series. If they had just come forward and said that from the beginning, I don't think there would have been people who were upset about it, annoyed. But I think it would have been a much better environment than we have now, where it's so hotly debated in the community So much so that there are two tribes developing because of it. Some of my fellow content creators are working rather hard to try to ram the past of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom into the established timeline presented from, say, Hyrule Encyclopedia or Hyrule Historia.
Hyrule Historia. Yeah.
And
My condolences.
to be fair, they are making a lot better headway than I thought, because there are things I had not considered before. In particular, if I were to bring one up, and it was in my last video as well. So, on Ganondorf's sword, the Gloom Sword, it has Kotake Kame written on it, which are the names of Ganondorf's mothers. And that's specifically from Ocarina of Time and The Wind Waker. In fact, the font that they use there is specifically from Wind Waker, which is something of note because they don't use that Hylian text in Breath of the Wild at all. The Hylian text that they use is a one-to-one cipher for the English alphabet. So why they are using another one that is a cipher to the Japanese kana is a question that needs to be asked. That being said, in some of the cutscenes, we see alongside Ganondorf these two Gerudo women. They have darker skin, and they have like sashes over them that in Japanese kana specifically, not even the Hylian text or Gerudo or anything like that, have the names written Kotake Kome. This mirrors the old hags from Ocarina of Time, except that they were like 400 years old in that game. Yeah. So the conclusion that some people are starting to draw is that the time that Zelda traveled back to is after Skyward Sword, back to when Kotake and Kome were around like 30 or so years old. And then they took the Gerudo King at the time, a Ganondorf, and basically whispered into his ear and helped move him in the direction of, we need to conquer Hyrule. And then about 400 years later, when the normal Ocarina of Time took place, they were essentially trying again with a new Gerudo King. It's a real interesting concept, but I feel that by itself is not enough to really justify this is in the same continuity, especially when there are so many other glaring issues.
That's the part that I'm in as well, because I still keep asking questions that I can even ask you later as well, because you've solicited questions and mysteries of what other things have you noticed that you feel are unanswered questions, and I posted a few of my own. I still have over at least dozens more, if you want to make time for that later. But one thing I also, if it may sound like heresy to people that are arguing for canon, not canon, but consider it's non-canon, but Hyrule Warriors in their multiverse that's already established, where they just openly accept, hey, you know what? There's different universes, all sorts of different Links and Zeldas doing their own thing. It's okay. And in fact, there's even more that we haven't even discovered, like one of my personal favorite non-canon, wish they were canon, Linkle, for example, has their own story, has their own universe, isn't even tied to this one. Who's to say that there aren't other timelines that we just haven't explored yet? And like you said, if Nintendo had come out and said, we're making Breath of the Wild, it's the start of a new universe, deal with it, there would be some objection, but I believe that there probably would be more people, at least speaking for myself, celebrating that. I'd be like, wow, this is cool. Like, we get to have these same beats that we love, but in a very refreshing setting that have some winks and nods to what we recognize in terms of names and faces. But it's new, and we can start fresh, and this is a great jumping on point for people, as Breath of the Wild ended up being anyway.
I agree, and I wish that they would... I wish Nintendo would come forward in a more official stance with the timeline itself, and honestly remove entries from it into their own continuity. For example, the Minish Cap, Four Swords, and Four Swords Adventure greatly conflict with other parts of the timeline. But if they were carved away and said that this was its own trilogy, it doesn't connect, its own little thing, that would have been fine. It cleans up the timeline. I feel that Hyrule Warriors is not canon and its own thing. I also feel that Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, for as good of intention as it was to make backstory for Breath of the Wild, I feel that they really fumbled with it. And adding in more time travel to the mix so that way they could have a happy ending without conflicting with Breath of the Wild feels like a major step back. Like people were playing that game basically for a bad ending. So to fix a bad ending in such a convoluted way really did not sit well.
I'm going to mark that you said that because that's going to come up again with something I want to talk about later with Tears of the Kingdom.
Okay, sure.
I feel the exact same way.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And speaking of Hyrule Warriors, or Age of Calamity specifically, there is one thing that they did in there that I like, and I kind of wish was canon to Tears of the Kingdom. Not because it answers a question, but because it seems directly related to another anachronism that I feel adds to the complexity. It's part of my unanswered questions dialogue that I want to have.
Well, go ahead, tell us.
Sure. So, the Master Sword anachronism is, of course, a hot topic debate right now. You know, the sword of its own will, which we know it does have its own will, and, you know, it's a key to time, so it just blinks away to join Zelda in its fractured state. But that in itself creates an out-of-place, very important element that now persists throughout all of, let's just assume that it's all, it is part of one big continuity, it's not a separate timeline, let's assume it's there. That creates so many problems for so many other Zelda games for just having this other Zelda with this other Master Sword chilling out somewhere, charging up for this one specific date, who knows, 10,000 years later. It creates a lot of problems.
I've personally been going
because simply out of it.
I've personally been going with 12,000 years as a time frame, but go ahead.
12,000? Oh, it's all relative. Let's say 12,000 years. The Purapad. The Purapad is another chicken and egg closed loop anachronism, because which came first, the Sheikah Slate or the Purapad, if you consider Age of Calamity? Because Zelda takes the Purapad, goes back in time, and then Mineru's like, hey, let me see that. Let me reverse engineer that. Oh, okay, I like this fast travel thing. I'm going to incorporate it. So I guess that's the in-game explanation for why you can fast travel with Sheikah Tech to the Zonai ruins and shrines and all that. They all have the same fast travel system because Mineru adapted that from the Purapad.
So,
however,
just really quick,
go ahead.
Without giving too much away, I actually have an entire theory based about this that will be coming out in the future. But go ahead, continue.
Okay. And I could be completely wrong, absolutely. I look forward to seeing that video with that. This is just my take on it. Where, okay, so we have the Purapad, and then later, Purge just finds the Sheikah Slate in Age of Calamity. It's just there on the ground. Okay, picks it up. Are we to then, perhaps considering Tears of the Kingdom, is there a suggestion that the tech that the Zonai had adapted from the Purapad eventually became the Sheikah Slate, and the Sheikah Slate eventually inspired the Purapad that went back in time to inspire itself through the Sheikah Slate? It's like, which came first? Because we have this out-of-place technology, no matter how you slice it, that is interfering with the development of a culture that then creates a whole new technological line that influences another culture that goes back to, it's a cycle on itself. So you don't just have the Master Sword, you have the Purapad that creates these weird complications when you think about it. So it's like bringing a cell phone back to the 1800s, like Connecticut Yankee story.
So consider this. A bit ago, I did a video about how Pora specifically was indirectly responsible for the tragedy of the calamity. And it's a little unfair to place all the blame at her feet, but it essentially says that she was so focused on technological advancement she didn't even consider that the technology could be overwritten. She could have a backdoor into it and turned against them. Well, this assessment gets worse if we consider that Sheikah technology is ultimately based on her. Because if 12,000 or more years has passed with information about the calamity in the past, then they could have theoretically inserted a little memo for for Pora or whoever else to try to prevent this outcome. Or worse, better, I suppose, would be tell future Sheikah not to develop war machines, so that way this isn't an issue. But they didn't, because I guess they never did. It's circular time logic.
Yeah. I mean, we are talking about a woman who has no problem casually changing her physical age just per whims. So, to quote another movie quote, just like in Jurassic Park, your scientists were so focused on if they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. So,
that's a good
I feel
quote
that
from
that
it.
can apply.
I'm not the biggest fan of those movies, but that's a good quote.
Yeah. It's just the hazards, the perils of technology sometimes, and where it can take us. But especially when, of course, you add time travel, it kind of complicates things.
I do like the idea that Pora is basically both the end and the start of the Sheikah technology, because they did a lot of really impressive things. We see that with the now missing Sheikah technology.
Mm-hmm.
The towers themselves is basically a cell network from modern day. The Divine Beast are powerful war machines, but I think that they're just really big statements, a big flex of what they could do with their technology. I'm a little surprised that Ancient Hyrule didn't do what many Japanese games does, and suspiciously look like, say, Tokyo.
Yeah, honestly.
Hey guys, let me interrupt to just ask you to subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. Now, back to the conversation.
That, like many people bring up, I am baffled by the complete, not just absence, eradication of all Sheikah technology. It doesn't make any sense, no matter how you choose to slice it, that they could A, be so thorough, and B, even want to do that and bring themselves back to the Dark Ages, where we have to go back to making wooden block houses manually by hand instead of having our convenient automatons do it for us, or use fast travel, or create water, or things like that.
Not
It doesn't make any sense.
not to mention that there are things like it doesn't. Some of the structures, some of the Sheikah structures that were removed don't make sense if we look at the landscape. For example, the Shrine of Resurrection. The chamber itself was actually an elevator, according to the Champions of the Ballad DLC, going down into that big engine place where Maz Koshia was. And in in Tears of the Kingdom, if you go into the Shrine of Resurrection, the ground is completely intact there. It's as though there was no elevator there to begin with. All the Sheikah walls and technology are stripped away, of course. But it seems like there should be a big chasm there going down below, maybe even into the depths. Then, in the depths under it, there is there's like the Spring of Resurrection, I think they call it, and there's healing water down there in a big open area. And maybe if you cross your eyes and try really hard not to think too deeply about it, maybe that divine dungeon place that Maz Koshia was in could have filled that area, but I don't think it's big enough to have. That being said, you talked about how it doesn't really make sense for them to get rid of it, because what's the harm in having a resurrection facility? What's the harm in having fast travel networks? What's the harm in having a satellite imaging of the land. There really isn't any, but they chose to, I guess, get rid of it. And even that's a guess, because the game doesn't address the question at all. There is no mention in Pora's diary or anything from Robbie that talks about what happened to the Sheikah Tech.
And it doesn't even make sense from some people who may attempt to say, well, they were so traumatized by all the technology being hacked, they got rid of it all. No. This is a world that's still very lethal. Every single blood moon, they know they're fighting a losing war of attrition against these monsters that will continuously resurrect themselves. And what do? Militias arm themselves with sticks fused with whatever monster horns happen to be around on the ground. They know that's not going to fly. There is no reason they would throw away the armor, the weapons, the medical, the transportation logistics for it, the communication side of it. There's no way they would throw all of that away in the world that they live in.
I mean,
I refuse to believe that.
Theoretically, that such a choice would fall on a single person, Princess Zelda herself. And it could be that after fighting the Calamity for over 100 years, where she's conscious during the whole thing, she reached a conclusion that they just need to get rid of any potential war vehicles that the Calamity could take over. I wish that there was some dialogue in game to back this up. I wish that there was another secret Zelda journal that talks about why she made her decisions, but we're stuck with this situation.
Oh yeah.
As for what you said about people using, like, fused weapons and sticks with monster parts, that's actually all post the upheaval. Because before the upheaval, which is when Ganondorf wakes back up, or before he wakes back up, there was miasma in the air, and the Japanese name for gloom is miasma, and it makes a lot more sense to call it miasma than gloom. But essentially, the miasma was starting to come out and make people sick, which is why Zelda and Link went down to investigate. But when he rose the castle and opened the chasms, that's when it started to spill out, and at that point is when it started to attack and corrode weapons. So, for probably like 5 or 6 years before the upheaval happened, they still had access to good weapons, and we'll ignore the weapon durability mechanic, where even good weapons would break after like 12 hits.
Yeah. They're just, they don't have the best crafting materials in this Neo Hyrule, I guess.
Another thing that really causes a problem is when you take into account the phrase 10,000 years. Because if 10,000 years or more has passed since those ancient times, it really says that Hyrule and all of its people, well, they're very stagnant in their development. You think that they would have developed some better weapons, something to advance their technology, but no, they just seem happy for 10,000 years to do basic agriculture and probably use like outhouses and other things.
Yeah. Everything's still horse-drawn and everything.
Like, I hate to think of the idea of how much death there is from childbirth in this world.
I like that there's just a general lack of education. There's like one attempt at a school in like Hateno village, and like that's pretty much it. Everyone's just in the Dark Ages. It's so weird. And that's again why I said, why would you throw away Sheikah Tech? Where, okay, it got possessed one time and it backfired, but there was no way to know that would happen. And even if that happened, even if you threw away the Sheikah Tech, logic would dictate, okay, this one didn't work out. Let's make an improved version, Sheikah 2.0 tech, that is not going to be corruptible, at least against what we know.
Yeah, they could have conducted experiments to see what could corrupt it and so forth. I think that there's a very interesting parallel between the blue Sheikah energy they were using to power it, and now the green mystic energy that the Zonai were using. And that's going to be part of my upcoming theory, because it's a mystery that remains unknown. And of course, these three different colors, red,
blue, and green, of course, common pattern in Zelda, of course.
Mm-hmm. So we know that the gloom is all red, and when the malice / gloom overrides machines, and we see a machine in Tears of the Kingdom overridden with gloom, not just malice. It's they're all glowing with that reddish hue. Anyhow.
Yeah, we're getting way into just one topic of many. But that's what I love about this game as well, is no matter what, even in a highly debatable state, there's so much that you could discuss that's so fascinating about, the series, much less this game, that it really is such a cause for celebration. Love to see it every time.
You were mentioning about the story aspects of Tears of the Kingdom, and how I guess you didn't really like the way it's structured. Go ahead and go into that.
Sure. So, like I said, a bit of a hot take, but I believe this is a well-told bad story. And what I mean by that is, there's no right way to tell a story, you could argue, but it is absolutely true that if you want to produce a desired effect, there are better structures for your story for that effect. Not everything works every given way. Like the way that you tell a story through environmental storytelling, like a very popular example would be like the Souls games or BioShock or open world Elder Scrolls games. You're not told overtly through cutscenes for the most part what happened, what you're seeing, the significance, everything. You're not force-fed that. But you can infer a lot of it by absorbing and immersing yourself more in the environment. That's one way of storytelling. It's a very valid way of telling a story. To say that there's no story there just means you're not looking. There is not an absence of story there. It's just told and conveyed in a different manner. You can tell stories through gameplay as well. Many action games choose to do this and this is where you sometimes get that ludonarrative dissonance, where sometimes what you do in the game does not, it conflicts with how the story is meant to portray a character or series of events. But with Zelda, throughout, it's chosen a very structured, very linear, very focused sort of storytelling, which is fine for the stories it wanted to tell. And Breath of the Wild chose to take it a little bit more and sacrifice some of that focus for the freedom of approaching stories in any which way that you wanted, which was fine, because from the Amnesia story point, since you have literally a blank slate to work with, piecing together memories out of order is okay. That absolutely is okay. That does not work for the stories Tears of the Kingdom is attempting to sell. The story it's attempting to sell is a focused narrative that does have a series of events in a very specific order, but they still allow the player to optionally see any of it, see some of it, see it at whatever pace they wish to, and most importantly and most damaging, see it completely out of order. Which, when you choose to do that for what is, so important, for when you actually just have all of it together, flowing in one big, I guess you say intended just flow, just all of them in order. They even have it in the memories where you can watch them in order if you want. You can rewatch them. There's clearly a defined intended order. When you give the player the freedom to ruin the storytelling experience like that, I don't see how that's beneficial. Especially since some of the storytelling in Breath of the Wild, or not Breath of the Wild, but Tears of the Kingdom, is very good. At least especially by Zelda standards. It's not only just cinematic, but there's excellent character development. I love the way many of these characters are written, they're portrayed, their actions really resemble it. This is one of my favorite, arguably my favorite version of Ganondorf in the entire franchise. I love the way he's portrayed, I love the way he's written, I love the actions, I love the presence that they have. This Ganondorf is fantastic. I really like this Ganondorf a lot.
Let me bounce off that really quick. So, you're right about the problem with watching the memories out of order, especially in this game, because a couple of them actually flash back to previous memories you may not have seen, and I think that's a bit of a problem. But I did want to bring up how in the chamber, after you do the first one that shows King Waru, Impa tells you to go to the Bronze Temple. And when you go there into the back room, you see the map where they're all laid out. But on the walls from left to right, it actually shows you the proper order to watch them in. I personally think they should have gated it, so you go to Impa, she tells you to watch, to go find one geoclef, and then it would open up the next one, forcing a sequential order to watch if you wanted. But
that would have been significantly better.
But instead, they just make it so you see, say, the glowing sigil of the Master Sword, want to go check it out, and oh look, now you basically know exactly what happened.
Because when I did the Geoglyph quest on my own, I did not discover that until way later, when I believe you're basically forced to go there. It already assembled the quest line. So it's like, okay, well, this really would have been helpful earlier, or maybe Impa could have, hey, meet me down here. Oh wow, look at these tiers. There seems to be an order. At least some guidance would have been helpful for this particular story beat, because you have that flashback mainline story that adds so much context, and more importantly, a lot of weight to the significance of gaining the Master Sword. To me, I didn't know you could also alternatively, because I already had it by then, get the Master Sword through, helping the Deku Tree. I didn't realize that. Or if you just happen to find a certain creature and happen to be strong enough in a certain way to just do it on your own. That sort of open freedom to discover things is cool, but the most significant, like the weight of the act of doing it, was absolutely best portrayed in the Dragon Tier questline. And to miss out on that, to undermine it that way, to make it completely optional, I feel such a disservice to what is such a fantastic contextualization to the weight of the actions that you're performing.
So, this talk we're having is filled with spoilers, so I don't mind bringing this up.
Oh, yes, for sure.
I just wanted to say that in my playthrough, because I was so active with playing the open world part of the game and flying around, I encountered the Light Dragon, and I decided to harvest. There were two things I wanted to do to it. One, I wanted to get a good picture of it, because I was wondering if its name was going to show up as Raru or Minoru. I did not know the truth yet, and was surprised that it showed up just as Light Dragon, as opposed to, say, the other three dragons that have specific names. But then I went to go harvest a horn off of it, right? And when I did that, I looked at it and its trailing rainbow light off of its head, and I was thinking, is that a sword in its head? But then I shot the horn off and went diving for that and didn't encounter it again. But I was so close there to just basically having this whole magical sequence ruined, because I would have been like, oh, it's the Master Sword. Can I pull it? Yep, I can, because I maxed my stamina first.
The reveal, that was so good. And the dramatic turn during the course of events leading up to that was so good. I was moved, and I was like, that's really good storytelling here. And it's completely ruined by the design choices the developers chose to make about it. It frustrates me. Speaking of the Light Dragon, by the way, one of my unanswered questions is, why is it called the Light Dragon when Zelda is the Sage of Time and her Secret Stone specifically amplifies her time powers?
Oh, so we are so
shouldn't she be called the Time Dragon?
So
it seems kind of weird to me.
So I want to make a video basically addressing this, because it seems, I'll just be frank, it seems stupid for her to swallow her stone and become a dragon. It's clear that her stone is amplifying her time powers, not her light powers.
Yep.
So
they directly say that.
So why would she jump to the conclusion that if she turns into a dragon and is trying to heal the Master Sword, that this would even work? And it just seems like a very poor decision that, frankly, she got lucky with. She got lucky she turned into a light dragon and not a time dragon. Though, I think it would have been cool to see a super powerful time Master Sword. But that's just me.
Yes. Like the one from Phantom Hourglass, like freeze time for a little bit. That would have been awesome.
It would have been.
Like a time infused Master Sword, that'd be awesome.
And maybe
same exactly.
And maybe, just maybe, it would have an attack power higher than 30.
Oh wow, let's not get crazy here. It really does bother me how incredibly it's like all the power of the Master Sword. You pour sacred energy, its power is limitless, and by limitless I mean it still has a cooldown, it breaks relatively easy, and doesn't necessarily always glow blue when there's evil around. Just want to point that out. No caveats there.
Yeah, like it doesn't react to the gloom hands or the gloom spawn as they're officially called directly.
Oh.
But when Phantom Ganon shows up, yeah, it lights up.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. He was like, what led to her decision of, you know what, I'm just gonna swallow this stone and take a gamble on this huge, massive event that literally there's no taking back, even though there is apparently a take back. Where, I'm sorry, did you not just hold off like Calamity Ganon with your sacred power alone for over a century? You seem pretty good with sticking out the long game, and now you have this direct thing that can amplify your long game. You literally have time. And you have the Master Sword that also is the key to time, and you're not doing anything with it. I don't know how you're not connecting this. It's kind of frustrating to watch that.
If we're going to criticize this, I want to bring something up, which is that the way the memories play out, it implies that a short time after Minoru has passed is when Zelda chooses to do this action. And Minoru is she's messed up from the fight, so much so that she's convinced she's gonna die, and that's cool. I mean, she chooses to go into the Pora Pad, and that fails ultimately, but we'll ignore that for a moment.
Yeah.
So it's then that Zelda sort of chooses that she's gonna go ahead and swallow the stone and become the Light Dragon, and I'm willing to give some benefit of the doubt that maybe if she couldn't get back to her own time on her own, that's the only real option to her. But people have been bringing something up in the community, which is that between Breath of the Wild, the end of Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom, like about 6 or more years has passed, and Zelda and Link don't look like they've aged at all. In fact, it's very possible that because of the Shrine of Resurrection on Link, and because Zelda was a spirit for like 100 years, they might actually be immortal, or at least age very slowly. I
always just assumed there was just some rejuvenation effect, as just the Shrine of Resurrection would assume. I just dismissed it like that.
But more importantly, though, is Zelda has her basically an adult lifetime ahead of her while she's in the past. So she could be doing things for, say, 30 years to try to set up or fix the problems. She could be trying to hone her time powers to get back to the present. She could actively do things with the other sages, like raise the land masses that she wants to protect Link with into the sky. They could have portrayed it that she spent time to set up the future to be what she expects, so that way she isn't messing up the time stream. Instead, she basically, like a week after Minoru passes, swallows the stone and kind of gives up and wants to be a dragon forever.
I've talked with someone else, just a casual friend. Oh, I'm sorry, were you done? Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay. But I had mixed thoughts about that engagement with what was her motivation in the past, because one of my objections of Zelda in the past was I really felt she was sandbagging in the past in the fight against Ganondorf. She doesn't try to really use her light powers to any great effect. She's like, hey guys, I got light arrows. These really worked against Calamity Ganon. Let's try these out real fast, see what they do. Didn't even make any real attempt to use light that she knows works, and even sees Rauru using it, except it's like, you know what, I think I'll slightly help you by putting my hand on your shoulder and empowering the light you're doing, but I'm not really going to help you all that much. And somebody else pointed out, well, she maybe she didn't want to alter the timeline because she knows that he has to fall here, and she didn't really want to beat Ganondorf in the past. But I'm like, if that was the case, then why did she accept being a sage to begin with? Why did she tell all the other champions to prepare for this future battle if she really didn't want to tamper that much? By being in the past, she's in that direct position to change things, and she actively does. I do not believe she considers the quote-unquote implications of a future she can't control just for one event that she knows is going to happen. She seems dedicated in trying to stop Ganondorf here, and that she actually tries, but also doesn't kind of try. So I'm not sure I believe that. I believe it's very unfocused, her motivations in the past. Because at that point, she doesn't know if she can come back. She really doesn't. And until the Master Sword appears in front of her, she doesn't really have an objective.
I'm a little bit more lenient with her. Let's call it her confused state, because she could be concerned that her actions would drastically change time and possibly even delete herself, not to mention the person who I feel she is in love with, Link, from the future. But then you're right, she does take a more active role. She becomes the Sage of Time. She tries to help Sonia with Sonia's apparent assassination, which, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt there. Ganondorf was using a puppet, a copy of her, to do that. So she might think that she's obligated to try to impact that, since that clearly is related to her being there. But at some point, you're right that she should realize that either she is meddling too much or she is not meddling enough. She should either take active control of the timeline to ensure bad things don't happen, or she should have, hid in a cave and tried to master her time powers all by herself.
Yeah,
instead,
she would have accepted that.
She's very wishy-washy about the whole thing, and that is a good criticism of her character as written.
Especially when you consider that she's an active, researcher. She's leading the exposition team. She's in the trenches, going in there to play archaeologist, and she's so educated and focused on her learnings that her father was annoyed. Like, she's a very proactive, very curious princess who actively wants to find out and seek answers. I don't believe that is really consistent with her choices in the past. It really seems like it's like a differently written Zelda. They're just kind of forgetting it.
So I really hate how her last line in the entire game is like, Link, there's so much I want to tell you, and we're not going to get to hear any of it.
That is storytelling mistake, classic 101. It's always show, don't tell, not tell, don't show. Don't tell me about the cool stuff that you saw. Please let me participate and engage. Please, this is a video game. This is one of the benefits of just not having hey, instead of really showing you or even letting it be DLC, I'm just going to talk to you about this cool thing that happened off screen. That's really not compelling.
I was really hoping going into the game that the memories would be not just
playable bits.
Yes, like
so amazing.
A curated bubble where we could play around in the past. But nope, that's not how they did it.
I was so eager to be like, wow, okay, we're getting flashbacks of it. We're going to see Zonai culture. We're going to see the Zonai people, because apparently we only see the last two of them. What happened to the rest of them? I really want to see this. What's this culture that they built? What's their history with the sky? What is the purpose behind their arc? So many questions regarding this culture that you're only shaving the barest tip, and in no way do we get a satisfying chunk to really chew on in regards to that.
We're both in the same camp here of, it would have been so nice if we could have seen more of the past. Tears of the Kingdom as a follow-up to Breath of the Wild. In general, there's a lot of connective tissue that is missing. The Sheikah technology mysteriously vanishing is of course one of them, but there are many other things that feel like they weren't very fleshed out. Hey guys, let me interrupt to just ask you to subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. Now, back to the conversation.
Outside of the Sheikah technology. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, where's Cass or Cass,
Oh
however you
yeah,
want to say it? Where's that
everybody,
accordion player? Come on,
everybody
come on.
wonders
Where
where
is
he
he?
is. So, but at the end of the stable quest, apparently Pin mentions Cass very briefly.
He does.
Okay,
Yeah,
I haven't
and
actually
I think
seen.
someone in Rito Village does as well, where he says like, "Yeah, Cass is somewhere over there. I'm gonna go meet up with him." I'm like, "Cool. Where is he? I want to meet up with him too."
And the thing that really bugs me is, so Cass has 5 children in the game. They're the Rito girls, the multicolored ones. They help out in the village when it's frozen. So none of them talk about their father at all, and this really bugs me. And I talk to like all of them during every portion of the day, and they're just talking about their usual town duties or being tired or whatever. I really wish that there would be more of Cass. Part of me is concerned that he might have died, but I guess people are talking about him being alive, if only briefly, so that's good. There's speculation that there's going to be DLC involving him, and while I hope that's good, especially with this franchise, I don't want to get my hopes up yet again. Imagine, just for a moment, let me get your hopes up, that there is a DLC that involves the ruins of Skyloft, and Cass went to investigate it. That would be cool.
Ooh, that almost makes me want to tell you how I would rewrite the ending.
Go for it.
Maybe at the end after I answer this question.
Okay, go ahead.
So between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, that's not necessarily Sheikah Tech related. Well, okay, I guess I'm cheating a little bit because there is something that is slightly related to it, but not really. So in Tears of the Kingdom, they double down on the sage, like, they're wearing masks that, resemble the divine beasts. And they kind of, understandable, they symbolize animals across the kingdom, like fire lizards, birds, fish. And this was brought up in Breath of the Wild. But since they double it down in Tears of the Kingdom, we have to ask again, why is there a camel and an elephant? When have those creatures ever existed in this world? Ever? There is no mention of a camel or an elephant. Why do they even know what those are? Much less, why are they associated with the Gerudo and the Zora? That makes no sense. Yeah, and that leads me to the other one, where, okay, if we're going down on this route, where the inspiration for the divine beasts were based on these sages, clearly, how involved are the Zonai in the creation of all of Hyrule? Because that brings up multiple times where the Rito apparently had some incident really bad in the past, and they talked about this Zonai god coming from the sky in the Stormwind arc. They have a song about it. They even have airships, and then they save them, and the god goes back, and they just leave the airships there. Why did they have airships? They're sky people. They have the tech. Like, if they're not really formed for the sky, then what were they doing before they invented airships to get around in the sky? And what's the deal with the lost city of Gorondia being underground in the depths, also being pivotal to Zonai Tech? The source of Zora's domain's water is also Zonai Tech in the sky. How involved is the Zonai in the creation and influence of literally every major race in Hyrule? It rewrites so much of it from Breath of the Wild. It's like a major retcon.
I do often feel that basically any interesting thing in Tears of the Kingdom you go looking for, whether it be a cave or an unusual feature, is always Zonai related. It always is, every single time. Like, all these people had to do was dig 10 feet underground and they would have found plenty of Zonai stuff. Never talked about.
And I mentioned this earlier too, yeah, like why are there Zonai ruins underground? I get they're mining for Zonai. Okay, great. But there's also labyrinths and coliseums there. There are depots for people to use Ultra Hand. And as you brought up, there's ghost soldiers there, still safekeeping weapons. There's giant Poe statues. What is the purpose? Was there a civilization down there? Which kind of ties into the wishful thinking ending that I want to write as well.
So I have a theory about when in time, our real world time, the decision to make the depths came about. And this follows along the previous logic about the games being a reboot and was inspired of trends, our real world trends around 2011. But I suspect around 2016, maybe 2017 or so, a little after the game, what Breath of the Wild came out and they were working on DLC. That's around the time that Stranger Things became a big cultural phenomenon. So I can't help but to wonder if the decision to make the depths, especially with the way it looks, might have been influenced by seeing the Upside Down from Stranger Things. If that is the case, then you could see how they basically would have taken the landscape from Breath of the Wild and just literally inverted it and then started to make a map around that. Possibly before certain story elements of the main game for Breath of the Wild 2, Tears of the Kingdom, had been fully established.
Personally, I think it was great because it really kind of retread, again, one of the most common things that we have with the Zelda overworld, which is this second world, a dark world, a parallel dimension, an alternate dimension, a second version of the main world. Like, I love that they've incorporated that with the depths, but that's also my criticism for it because, as you know, by playing through it, there's almost nothing there. Surprisingly barren.
There is a lot of interesting questions with no answers. That bugs me the most.
That's very frustrating. I don't mind mysteries, but mysteries are more interesting when you can get a little bit closer to the answer. Not, here's an unanswered question. Is there anything else I can progress with this? Absolutely not. Okay, moving on. Also, why are the Gibdos bugs now?
Yeah, so when I first, you can see this in my Let's Play if you check it out, but when I first get to Gerudo Town, is the first time I've encountered Gibdos. There are some wandering around in the town, and the town is basically ruined, and I'm just thinking like, oh, are these people? Are these what happened to the Gerudo? This isn't very nice. And
that would be cool.
But no, they're just like weird bipedal insectoid things now. So
they're just sandbugs now. Okay. Less interesting. Okay. Speaking of continuity, one of the things I think that was really cool in Tears of the Kingdom was the introduction of many like classic monsters, but also new monsters. But at the same time, it's kind of like some of the choices are odd. Like we have Froxes and Dondons that almost functionally seem like Dodongos, but we don't have Dodongos. Like maybe they're an evolved alternate state, who knows? Like we have Gibdos that are bugs now. But man, imagine, here's what I was thinking when I was going in the depths. This is what I was thinking is, there must have been all these pose, all these statues with royal armor. These were the Zonai people. These are their souls. They died down here. For some reason, they had to go from the sky underground, and they died down here in mass. And that's what we're collecting, are their souls. And that's why they're so prolific around all these other ruins and things like that. But at the same time, wouldn't it have been cool if we saw like some phantom suits or some dark nuts or some, like I like how they redid the like. I think that was super cool. But yeah. Man, imagine some of these other classic Zelda enemies that would have brought in, like Stalfos Knights or things like that. That would have been super cool.
Really quick,
honestly.
With the trailers leading up to the game, I like how nobody put together that the creature hanging upside down that Link was fighting was a like. Never occurred to anybody that was a like.
That was so cool.
Of course, we were all focused on like the cool flamethrower Link had, but yeah.
Yeah.
As for the underground itself, with the Colosseums and whatnot, it does hint at a dark history of the Zonai. Rauru himself seems to be... Rauru and his sister both seem to be a bit more enlightened. More on the path for peace than anything else. Trying to play the diplomat with the Gerudo and so forth. But it does raise a question of all those structures we see in the depths that clearly the Zonai had a hand in. What were they doing down there? Were they engaging in gladiatorial fights with people? Were they... Here's a pretty dark one. Did they have the early Hylians as slaves, even, or workers? Like, what was going on there? Did they just use constructs the entire time? We don't know, and I have a feeling Nintendo will never tell us.
I think we'll never know, but based on what I see, I do think it's really curious how we have this incredibly sophisticated technological race that's completely wiped out except for two people that go to the surface for an undisclosed reason. Everyone else is dead, but we see remnants of factories. There's a giant weapons factory in the sky. There's soldiers everywhere. What happened? Was there a rebellion? But clearly they got wiped out, and clearly this is a very, I don't want to say militaristic, but clearly there was a lot of, need for these sort of structures, for weapons. Most of the Zonai tech is weaponized. And it kind of makes you wonder, what was this race doing? And like I said, why would you go from the sky and not just be on the surface, go underground? What was down there? So, again, I would love to know more. I wish in the flashbacks we got to see that, see the ruination and fall of the Zonai people, which will cause Rauru and Minoru to go to the surface and conveniently not talk about the underground. Don't look at that. Don't ask questions. And we're just going to build a nice new kingdom over here. Like, hey, friends. Hey, multinational friends. We're all good here. And kind of work with that.
Let's just cover up the sins of the past.
It really, to me, it smells of a very bloody, dark history that I am very intrigued to learn more about, that I'm not getting answers to.
So it really bugs me how Minoru, after you get her as a sage, just sort of hangs out in the Spirit Temple, and there's no reason for her not to be willing to just info dump you with basically any questions you have. But when you talk to her, she's just like, I need to get ready. Run along to your sandbox.
Minoru, believe it or not, was actually the first person I unlocked when I was doing all the open world exploration, because I, brute forced the Thunderhead Island, because I just landed. I'm like, I wonder if I can go through that storm. I can't see anything. Oh god, I fell down. Wait, there's a thing down here. Wait, there's a mask down here. And so I started that quest completely by accident, because I was too busy trying to find all the shrines and everything before I did any of the champions or temples. Found her, did her first, and it turns out she's supposed to be done after, which means I had to go out of my way to do even the rings thing in Kakariko Village, because I completely skipped all that accidentally in my playthrough.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, and I'm with you. I think it would have been fantastic if Minoru acted as the companion in this game, as a portal and a viewpoint to the past and explain things. It really would have been so much better of an experience.
So I also tackled Thunderhead Island earlier than you're supposed to, and brute forced my way through the storm. But when I got to that door, I made a hard save, and then I pressed it open, and there was the mask, and I saw that she was pointing me towards the construct factory, which I already had played around in some, and decided, no, I don't want to do this yet. I would rather do this on stream at the appropriate time. So I backed away from it. But much like the Master Sword, I was really close to shortcutting something vital in the game, and I'm really glad I've held back. I recently watched somebody do the Phantom Ganon fight up in Hyrule Castle, after you complete the regional phenomenon, where they had Minoru early, and surprise, surprise, she doesn't show up there at all. No idea why she wouldn't show up, but she doesn't.
Really quick, what was the order you happened to hit the temples in?
So I went Rito first, then Gerudo, then Water, then Goron. And I actually, out of all the temples, I actually like the Fire Temple the best, because it really resembles a classic Zelda dungeon more than the others. I think when I do another playthrough eventually, I'm gonna see if I can complete the temple without using Zonai powers outside of Alter Hand to put minecarts on things. Because I'm really curious if it can be solved in a classical sense, or if there are parts of the temple that are broken that force you to use Zonai powers?
I tackled it in, as you know, I happened to do Minoru first, but in terms of the temples, I did the Gerudo first, then I did Goron, then I did the Water Temple, and then I did the Airship Blast.
Oh, okay. And so you got the most useful.
I'm with you.
You got the most useful ability last. Got it.
I didn't know I was playing it blind. I was just going through. Because I kind of started and kind of veered south and just kind of counterclockwise worked my way around the map. And because I explored the depths, I was like, oh, I guess I found the Fire Temple. I'll just keep that in mind for later.
I was kind of reminded of when I played Breath of the Wild for the first time. Because, they're like directing you after the Great Plateau to go towards Kakariko. And I was about to, and then a star fragment fell towards Gerudo. And I went running that way, which led me to do...
Easy distraction.
Yeah.
Which to me, and this is, I think I'm going to sound very critical. If anybody has watched any of my game review or written review content, I can be very harsh, but I believe fair because I will support it with evidence in the game. These are not strong temples. Nobody will remember these temples. And I find that regrettable. They are visually interesting, but mechanically, outside of the Fire Temple, like being the strongest of them, I agree with you, they just felt like slightly glorified shrines. And you could argue, okay, well, all the temples are kind of like that, just disconnected or even slightly interconnected puzzles that are tied together even by something of a theme in most of them. And that's kind of what these were. Sure. But there's a few fundamental things that are different too. Number one, and this is a criticism I have for Tears of the Kingdom in general compared to Breath of the Wild that baffles me, there was a striking lack of combat in these temples. There's no mini-bosses. Enemies are very sparse. There were so many times that I had to throw away weapons because there was nothing to use them on. There was a striking lack of combat, and I felt that with how diverse and how dynamic you can make combat in Breath of the Wild and now Tears of the Kingdom, just so much more explosive. There's so many more options. It's surprising to me that they don't give us a lot more stuff to really sink our teeth into. I felt that was a bit of a missed opportunity. And some of the padding in almost every single Zelda game are mini-bosses, and we don't have mini-bosses here. The path to reach a temple, to me, seemed longer than the temple itself, which is fine. I like that extended experience, but the temple itself should have been the set piece, the really big, meaty chunk that you kind of are goaled towards. So, yeah. I didn't feel they were that much better than the Divine Beasts that people felt were underwhelming. I also felt similarly underwhelmed.
So the Divine Beast, I feel, were pretty underwhelming. It didn't help that they were largely the same visually.
Yes.
But yeah. I did want to address the temples in Tears of the Kingdom. Two of them, the air and water one, they're more of an elaborate pathway to the actual temple itself. And I give it credit. It's a stunning corridor that you're going down. I know it's an open world game, but they're very much funneling you down a path to get to the actual temple. The Lightning Temple does that to a degree, because the early parts of the pyramid is basically a path to the central room. Then
100%.
Then they give you the central room, and there's a branching path to go unlock the various locks. I'm pretty critical of that. I feel like just putting you in a spectacular... It reminds me of the criticisms of Final Fantasy 13, where everybody was calling that a corridor. And these temples feel very much like a corridor with a break towards the end that leads you to like 4 other corridors before you finally get to go to the boss.
And what I think also didn't help the experience was the champions that you have with you feel largely useless. They are glorified puzzle mechanics, and you don't even need to use them for even the final boss. They don't feel critical. Imagine, if I could redo this game, if you could play as them in segments like you could, say, in Wind Waker, where you accompany the sages through the temples, and they feel like characters. They have their own movesets. They're critical to your successful completion of this temple. I felt that would have been a much more engaging experience.
I will give credit that the sages actually fight alongside you. In particular, Tulin is very good at scoring head-heads, and I found him very valuable. But the other ones, they mostly just get in the way. I turned Regio off really quickly because I kept accidentally starting up her lightning thing and found it really...
I've done that too.
And
like, Sidon's water ability is like completely useless. I feel so bad.
I've seen people use it well against Lynels because it can soak a hit. But yeah, like trying to have all of them out not only impacts the frame rate of the game, but it's just a mess when you're trying to fight, to do actual fights, or even basic movement things can be really annoying.
I felt they should have been treated like the medallions in Link to the Past. You get them, they're on your, gauntlet, your Thanos gauntlet, and you could just snap and just summon that power and use it. Like, okay, I really want a targeted lightning strike right there. Okay, I infuse my arrow, boom, big explosion, it has a cooldown. Or I want to pick up a giant rock and heave it, a giant fiery meteor boulder at this thing. Okay, great, activate Yunobo power. Boom, there we go. It's a cooldown. Water shield, go, Would have been, I don't know, I felt it could have been better implemented.
Yeah, it could have been...
Hey, I need you to manually go talk to me, and then you can activate your ability, and then it's going to be on cooldown.
And you'd think that Yunobo's power would be more useful, because it's basically a mining tool, but the cooldown on it is so long, I really prefer just to throw my own bombs than using him.
Yeah.
Let's talk about rewriting the ending, since you wanted to. And that can be our last topic, okay?
Sure.
How would you fix the game? The ending.
Okay. Mate, could I be selfish, and after I do this, I can rattle off a quick lightning round of the unanswered questions that I still have? You can feel free to use them for your own things, because I'm curious if somebody else can do something with them. I just have unanswered questions.
Based on us talking, I have a feeling we probably share a bunch of those already, but yes, go ahead.
Okay, so here's my rewritten ending. Okay, so continue through Ganon, he becomes the demon dragon. I would have preferred one more phase where he becomes the wispy calamity dragon as sort of a callback, where it's like, okay, I'm the evolved form of this malice, more potent, and this is my dragon form. That's just fiery and intimidating. Because the boar form, as simple as it was still visually impressive. And the demon dragon would have been cool, I think, with just a little bit more demonic flames. Just art suggestion. I think it looked good, but I think we could have done better. We do that. Link and Dragon Zelda team up, they do their thing, they win the day. Great. We eliminated Demon King once and for all, probably, maybe. He'll come back later. But at the end, everyone's celebrating, great. The gloom, it's fine. The source has finally been killed. It starts receding from the surface. Some of the ruins can maybe fall to the land a little bit. For some reason, it's tied because we don't even know why they levitated to begin with, as you pointed out. However, Zelda's still a dragon. It turns out, when you ate that secret stone, that was permanent. It wasn't a suggestion not to eat it. It's permanent. There's no convenient, the force ghosts of Rauru and Sonya come out and empower Link through his arm to heal. No, none of that. You're telling me you could have done that at any time? No, I don't buy that. Even if you said, oh, well, the gloom around prevented them from doing... No, I don't believe it. No. Zelda's still a dragon. It's a tragic sacrifice. There's impact and weight to that decision. She basically killed her own lineage by choosing to become the light dragon that should be the time dragon. Okay, that's the end of the game. However, after the credits roll, what happens? Well, the expedition teams down below in the depths, they found that the gloom is not just receding on the surface, it's receding down there too, since there's nothing just outpouring it. There's no source anymore. There's no Ganon corpse emanating this stuff. So what happens? New structures are suddenly appearing in the depths. old Zonai cities, old structures and facilities. The stuff that we thought was barren, it was barren because it was covered up by those massive pools and oceans of gloom everywhere. But now that they've receded, the depths open up as a second world for you to explore, completely new. Not just a revised overworld that we saw in Breath of the Wild, so the mystery and the fascination of discovery and curiosity isn't as bright. Now it's rekindled, because now there's a new second world to explore. And what do we discover among some of these ruins? Mentions and evidence of the Triforce. This is where it was. This is why it wasn't there in Breath of the Wild. It was underground, almost sealed, just like how Ganondorf in Demon King was being sealed. That he was also covertly sealing this Triforce piece so no one else could use it against him, you know? And so what you do is you go on a quest, maybe you do 6 to 8 actual temples, or at least different ones, you just do more, and you assemble a piece of the Triforce, and using the almighty power of the goddess and its wish-granting potential, you wish Zelda back to her actual form. And then maybe after that, you and Zelda go on some archaeological adventures, you know? She is the explorer, she's like, and you actually have a couple side quests, and you do some archaeological digs and explorations together. There you go. Extra post-game content.
It sounds like you really want an extra 100 hours in the game.
I mean, extra good hours for sure. For me, my playtime was 200 hours just in my first playthrough, and I know I didn't even do everything. I just did the major things that I wanted to do.
Let me bounce off of what you were saying. So, I like the idea. They give a very brief nod to the wispy dragon thing we see from Breath of the Wild when Ganondorf swallows his stone. And I thought that was really cool. Even in my playthrough, I mentioned aloud, like, is this what the Calamity was trying to become? Because they're clearly drawing a parallel to it. But beyond that, that area that Ganondorf is just hanging out in, being, you know, a mummy, it's called, like, Gloom's Origins or Gloom's Lair, something like that. And I decided I wanted to explore that. So I built a flying machine, dropped down, did not touch the ledge that triggers in-game, and just flew around down there to see how big of an area that is around that platform. And it's pretty big. I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to, like, actually go out to the walls and see the exact limits of it, because I feel like the textures start to break down and don't look as good. But there is some interesting things out there. Like, the whole place is meant to sort of look like growing gloom trees, I would call it, with big glowing red leaves on the surface. So what you're saying about the gloom receding and exploring an area, that would make a pretty good place to explore as a post-game thing. As for actually including, like, 7 more temples and the Triforce, I don't know about that. That feels like that would need to be Breath of the Wild 3 territory. I do agree.
I would be okay with that, because I still am not so pleased with such a convenient ending to Tears of the Kingdom. If you had a dark note where you won, but it was bittersweet, and now the next journey is you now need to heal Dragon Zelda, I would be okay with that.
Hey guys, let me interrupt to just ask you to subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. Now, back to the conversation. So I've been playing with the idea for a long time that Zelda has the Triforce inside of her. And I know that if we look at other entries in the game, when a person is displaced from time, specifically in the adult timeline, when Zelda at the end of Ocarina of Time sends the hero back in time to his childhood, the Triforce from that point separates from the body and shatters. Oh, that's why there are 8 fragments, broken fragments, of the Triforce of Courage in the Wind Waker. So it seems to me that if Zelda sent herself back 12,000 or more years, and she had the Triforce in her, it should have left her. This is disproven because it shows the Triforce on her hand when she is healing the Master Sword. Though maybe, now that I think about it, if Sonia had the Triforce and Sonia was killed, it could have gone into Zelda. I'll have to play with that later. More importantly, though, is that for the idea that the Triforce is the thing that is restoring Zelda, I think there is merit there. I don't know if the scene is supposed to depict Rauru and Sonia magically, through Link, fixing Zelda like Minoru theorizes in the extra scene. But it could be something as simple as the three of them are combining their power to use the Triforce inside of Zelda to heal her, to fix her. This is all speculation, I wish they would say that, but it fits with the theory that the Triforce is inside of Zelda. Now, as for the idea of using the Triforce to heal dragons, based off of what you're saying, I would like to see Breath of the Wild 3 be something like you use the Triforce to heal the other three dragons, Nehru, Dinrel, and Varosh, and see what happened with that. Because apparently, there is a way to reverse draconification, and there are three dragons who clearly have been draconified, so they should fix that.
That's assuming they are draconified and not just natural dragons, though.
I feel that the game really hints at the idea that they were once people. Probably Zonai. Minoru talks about how it's a forbidden act to become a dragon. And that implies there are people who have done it before.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just saying that there also are real dragons. So what's the difference, you know?
Well,
and we've seen in The Legend of Zelda that there's different versions of dragons, and not necessarily the serpentine ones. So maybe some of them are draconified, maybe some of them aren't.
Did you notice how Aquamantoise did not appear as a boss in this game?
I mean, there's several bosses that didn't appear in this game of dragons.
But Aquamantoise in particular is a classical European dragon. I know people are going to be quick to bring up how Gleeok is a type of dragon, a multi-headed dragon, and that's fair. But they may have been trying to pull back on other types of dragons because there are the Eastern style dragons so prevalent in the game.
Sure. And maybe it reminded me of Barba from Zelda 2 and Volvagia from Ocarina of Time. Like those serpentine sort of dragons. But then you also have like Valu from Wind Waker, who also could be argued to be a European type dragon.
There are fan theories about Valu being directly related to
So we clearly have the Eastern Western dragons. It's difficult to say. And then of course the dragon spirits in Skyward Sword that are very unique in design.
I feel that they're more Eastern.
So I'm with you. I would like to see more clarification. They are definitely, I would say, are more Eastern-based ones. I just want my Dark Knight enemies. What can I say?
I know that was something that I really wanted to show up in the game too. I sort of had a quasi encounter with what I was hoping for, because in the depths I encountered some rock armored bokoblins riding stout horses, and it's not.
Yeah, and they really resemble them. Yeah.
They do, and they're not quite there, but it was a little close. Since you gave your thoughts on how to fix the ending, I'll quickly ramble about my ideal solution to fix the ending.
Sure.
You were right that a bittersweet ending would have been better in this case. Fixing Zelda, frankly, feels unearned. I would have liked something to where, say, you defeat Ganondorf, his dragon form explodes, and then the light dragon is floating around, and you're falling, and you get some sort of message, maybe Zelda even talking at you, some remnant of her mind, saying to do something. And this leads into a post-game situation where you have to do some relatively time-consuming path in order to get the extra ending. And the extra ending is then around basically the same, where Rauru, Sonia, and Link solve that problem. There is a quest chain in the game that involves going to like these floating star-shaped islands that have murals on them, and that could have been a really interesting post-game thing to do, where after you defeated Ganondorf, you can go investigate those to get clues about how to fix things, and maybe even find out that they are recordings from the ancient past speculating about draconification, because all they actually are in the game is just like a servant of Sonia's, recounting things about the past that aren't very interesting. Some of them are a little interesting. They talk about like how Rauru was an aloof king who would often go hunting. They talk about how Sonia was a priestess before she met him. I guess she still is. Yeah. That's fine, but it would have been way more interesting for those tablets to have some deep lore or connection to fixing Zelda. And they're spread out enough that it takes some work to track them down without, looking them up online.
Yeah, I would love the better usage of the opportunity to put some lore dumps in there. I think, because like you said, it's ancient Hylian. We can't, we have to basically figure out, this Rosetta to uncover it. That could have been, again, more glimpses into the past. That would have been fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, there was one thing I wanted to say about earlier, which is you were talking about companions. Minoru would have been a really good companion, and the game very much outright says she was basically planning to be your companion. But when I first played the game and was on the Great Sky Island with Rauru around, I was thinking it was really cool that I have Rauru as a companion, and was really disappointed when he leaves at the end of the tutorial. Because
that's true.
It would have been really cool to just have him around to get his insight on things that you're doing. Hopefully not as bad or intrusive as a Navi or Fi, but it would have been nice to have that companion in the game with you.
Sure. So, just to quickly rattle off a few more unanswered mysteries off the top of my head. Yeah, just rapid fire. Because I have so many, and at the end of the day, I'm with you since we talked since the beginning. Sometimes there's so many questions where at some point we have to ask ourselves, is there even an answer to find? Is it not just better to assume this is just something completely separate? So here we are.
I've been referring to it as theory baiting. Because,
that's a good point.
They may not intend to ever give us an answer. They're just throwing out concepts so people would make traction for their game. Go ahead.
Yeah, because while I was playing the game, I was writing down these questions of, okay, I have questions about what I just saw or experienced. Let me write this down. Let me look it up later. Surely some expert, some lore guru is going to have some clue about what I just saw. So in case I miss it in this big open game, which is easy to do, somebody else can clarify or just illuminate and educate me. But we'll see. I don't know. I haven't seen some of these. Maybe there's been updates. So of the stuff that we've already mentioned, some other stuff we haven't mentioned is there a symbolic meaning to the secret stones being Magatamas? Because there have been Magatamas like as materials in like Skyward Sword and Triforce Heroes, like there were upgrade materials. And Magatamas are commonly made of jade, which is a green stone, like Zonai Tech. So is there a meaning to them being Magatamas? Like what is the purpose, the symbolic meaning of them being it? And maybe it's just a translation thing, but maybe they should just call them, like, instead of secret stones, just sacred gems or jewels, I don't know, beads. It draws attention to itself, and I kind of wonder about it. Because you also have things like the sages also provide medallions in Ocarina of Time, so what's the relationship there? Ganondorf what's the plan behind making illusions of Zelda to just make things worse across Hyrule? Like, I understand the part where he was baiting Link in the castle to kill him. Great. But you already had Doom Hands hunting him out anyway. Like, why were you specifically obstructing the champions in such a roundabout way? Especially when you consider he directly sent a Phantom Ganon to stall out or at least poison the Great Deku Tree. Like, and another thing is, why is Phantom Ganon so weak? Like, when you appear it, I was thinking like he would be like a strong imposed version of pure gloom. But no matter where you encounter him, Phantom Ganon is always just emaciated, weakened warrior who staggers and stumbles and is slow. And yeah, he can still hit like a truck if you're not well prepared, but you can overpower him very easy. Like the power scaling just isn't there. So why is Phantom Ganon so weak, no matter where he is? It's very bizarre, especially for how erratic and how quick and fast and strong the hands are, the Gloom Hands are. I've already asked questions, of course, about the Zonai ruins, but and I mentioned this in one of your videos too. Like, what is the purpose behind some of the ruins being lifted and not others? And where did they come from? It seems very, again, weird to go from the sky to underground and ignore the surface as a medium. Very weird. But the last big question that I have, and I'm sure plenty of people have as an unanswered mystery, what the heck is the deal with the ancient hero aspect armor? That thing is not Zonai, it's not Hylian, and the description says, oh, well, he had an exploit of saving Hyrule. Seems like a pretty big deal. Who, or more importantly, what is that ancient hero that no one ever mentions, looks like absolutely nothing, and almost, again, it kind of looks like a jade dragon that the Zonai often depict in their architecture and devices. Like, is this hero to the Zonais? That's also a separate race? Like, it just came out of nowhere. Wasn't expecting it.
Regarding the ancient hero aspect, a lot of people are speculating that it is a Hylian Zonai hybrid. In other words, when a Zonai and a Hylian love each other very much, like Rauru and Sonia seem to have, they have children. And apparently that could be the outcome of it, even though that would still be like thousands of years after Sonia and Rauru had died.
But to me, it's like it has features that aren't on the Zonai. Like, it has a big tail. Like, Zonais don't have tails as far as I can tell. Unless they're very well hidden among the two that we've seen. But it's very pronounced in the armor.
Does it have a tail? I'll have to take a look at it again. I didn't pay too much mind to it because I honestly wasn't too interested in it. I took a look at the stats of the armor. I was like, this is a full piece thing. I was told by a couple of people on my streams to go talk to Pora and Impa because they have dialogue reflecting it, and they both basically just say that this is what the ancient hero looked like. But yeah, that it's an unanswered question. I'm inclined to say it's supposed to be a Zonai Hylian hybrid. I don't know.
I think it more resembles, like I said, the dragon heads that we use as Zonai techs. Like, it looks more like that with the red mane of hair, the sort of sharpened snout that's different from the flattened one of the Zonai. Obviously, it doesn't have the big ears. It has short, sharpened ears, kind of like a Hylian, but also not quite. And the green skin is such a huge thing. And also consider the fact that the armor looks like the architecture of Zonai Tech as well. It's almost like you're a living Zonai Tech creature yourself. Which is why I think it's like, is it draconic in nature, like where they drew their inspiration from? I'm wondering. You look kind of more like a dragon, in my opinion. It's clearly different, and even if we do entertain the fact that it could be Zonai or Hylian hybrid, that's still vastly different than anything the Hylian lineage or royal families ever disclosed. Which, again, talking about what I talked about before, how ingrained is the Zonai to the creation of this Hyrule? It seems pretty significant. Oh, and one last thing is, I think when you brought up the whole thing with the Leviathans in the depths, I'm like, that's true. And I didn't stop to think about it. It's like, how many different other Leviathans? Because I remember the whole theory of these Leviathans are nods to other giant whales in the Zelda history, like the flying whale, the Skyward Sword, or the Windfish, maybe even Jabu Jabu, or the Ocean King. But how significant were they maybe to the Zonai culture if they also maybe were in the sky and some of them fell to the ground, some of them went underground with the Zonai, again, for whatever reason they did that, and they died there, and that's just how it is. I
So
don't know.
the three dark skeletons, to me, they look like giant snakes, or something serpentine like that. They don't have the claws that we see on the three dragons. They just look like it's a big snake. So
I think they may just be missing those, though.
it
They
could
could
be.
be.
It's been like 12,000 something years, and
Yeah.
the enemies do use, if you are high enough level, dragon bone weapons, which has always been a question where to getting the dragon bones from. But again, these might just be things that Nintendo will never give us answers for because they are theory baiting.
Yeah, because, and that's a great thing to point out, the prevalence of dragon bones. Just because dragons are immortal, they're not invulnerable, clearly, because we not only kill one, but you can literally go up to a dragon, smack it with a stick, and that's enough to dislodge a tooth out of it. They're not invulnerable. You can kill them. But they're at some point in all the dragon-inspired architecture of the Zonai, dragons may have been part of the culture in the sky. I don't know. Could have been some sort of avatar thing where maybe they just kind of live with them as partner species.
All right,
I don't know. That's mostly what I have for today. Thank you for hearing me out for so long.
no problem. This has gone a little bit longer than I was expecting, but it's a good conversation. Thank you for
Yeah, it's
joining
always a
me.
pleasure.
Thank you for joining me, and maybe we'll do a follow-up sometime. Maybe when DLC comes out. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for having the patience to deal with some of my vocal opinions, but I also enjoy this conversation, so thank you very much for taking the time to have me on. I appreciate you.
No problem. All right, and I'm gonna cut it, guys. So talk to you all later. I'd like to give a special thank you to Oni Black Mage for showing up today. I'd also like to thank all of you for listening to the episode. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It's really close to being monetized, and I need 1,000 subscribers for that to happen. If you would like to go above and beyond, consider subscribing to my Patreon or becoming a channel member. Either one will get you access to my Discord server where you can talk to me more directly. In addition to that, there will be an additional video going up just for them. It's more personal in nature, still related to video games, but more of how video games impact me. With that said, I hope you all have a great day, and may the way of the hero lead to the Triforce.